Alright, welcome to another episode of Birdsong. I'm your host Kai Yuda, and in this episode I'm going to be encapsulating and also expanding upon some of the themes that I have been exploring and narrating lately. And if you have been plugged into any of my channels, whether on social media, the newsletter, any of our gatherings, well, you might say that some of those themes revolve around the mountains. Surprise, surprise. But there's actually more to it than that. There's a lot more to it. What we're talking about here is soul work, spirit work, creative artistry, creative expression, the expansion of awareness, holistic health principles, and the shamanic healing arts for higher states of consciousness. There's quite a few themes going on here. Now, to kick us off, I am going to start us with a Rumi poem. I came across this poem the other day where he says, "I want to sing like the birds sing, not worrying about who hears or what they think. I want to sing like the birds sing, not worrying about who hears or what they think." And from one perspective, you could say that that quote, it sums it all up really. It's getting so deeply in touch with our heart, soul, and spirit, with our authenticity, with our quirks, that we can be who we feel we truly are meant to be in all of our gifts, all of our power, all of our foibles, really just in all of our full expression of song. I think about the Greek philosophical maxim, know thyself. And it's all while contributing our unique medicines to both ourselves and others, particularly during these troubled times that we're in, where we really need everyone who's cognizant of the fact to contribute their medicines in the light of sacred reciprocity, right relationship, harmonious living between self and other, and the greater ecological and spiritual realms that we inhabit. Yeah, a lot of these, you call them a lot of different things. The word that's coming to my mind right now, the phrase is these Aquarian principles that so many of us have heard of or have studied or are aware of to some degree. As we make this collective transition through the astrological ages into a new paradigm that many of us are actively and consciously co-creating. So Rumi, I think I came across some of his work well over a decade ago, and it may well have been in preparation for my first journey over to the Amazon jungle, where I was developing a relationship with the master plants over there for holistic healing and higher consciousness. Although really I can't say with absolute unequivocal certainty at the time that I knew that this was going to be a flame that I was going to keep alight all these years later. So Rumi, the great Sufi mystic, it's been a while since I've revisited Rumi with any kind of depth, but for whatever reason, he's been coming into my field again lately, and I'm often drawn to his poem, Love Dogs, or at least in the translation by Coleman Barks, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to read it out. So, Love Dogs by Rumi. One night, a man was crying, "Allah, Allah!" His lips grew sweet with the praising, until a cynic said, "So, I have heard you calling out, but have you ever gotten any response?" The man had no answer for that. He quit praying and fell into a confused sleep. He dreamed he saw Qadir, the guide of souls, in a thick green foliage. "Why did you stop praising?" "Because I've never heard anything back." "This longing you express is the return message. The grief you cry out from draws you toward union. Your pure sadness that wants help is the secret cup. Listen to the moan of a dog for its master. That whining is the connection. There are love dogs no one knows the names of. Give your life to be one of them." There's something about that just stirs me in the right kind of way. Something about the universal grief and the longing that we as humanity experience, and our desire to be drawn closer to union with the divine. You know, that longing itself, the crying, the grief, the purity of the sadness and the desire and the sincerity and the intensity of our yearning is akin to the loyal and the heartfelt cries of a dog for its master. And it's giving ourselves to be love dogs, to be humble, devoted servants of the divine. You know, and even if it seems like our efforts go unnoticed or unnamed, it's to actually realize that those longings, those cries, that is the secret cup. That is part of the connection with the divine. And perhaps it's something to do with my approaching vision quest that I'm ruminating and reflecting on my yearnings and my longings at this stage of my life, and also future visioning, what the past reflections too on some of the major marker points along my journey. How am I telling my story? What parts continue to be emphasized or perhaps even overemphasized or underemphasized? Yeah, the larger story arc, the narrative arc of my life. And I certainly haven't told that narrative arc of my story in an extensive manner on the podcast before, and I don't think I'm going to here at this point in time. However, to be sure, the initial string of sacred medicine encounters back over in the Amazon with the late great ascended curandero, huachumero, maestro, Don Howard Lawler, that certainly played a significant part. The reasons that I was drawn over there, well, we could talk a lot about that. We could talk about the bioresonant aspect between my soul and certain ecological environments with all of their unique and specialized characteristics that were calling me forth and that my soul knew that it needed. Of course, we could talk about the psycho-emotional aspects of that journey. There's the path of vision and being drawn forth towards inspiration. Yeah, there's a lot of ways that we could approach it. What I will say, to try and keep it concise, is that I knew I needed to undergo some form of intense psycho-spiritual transformation, and there was a deep sense of urgency, as if my life depended on it. Years prior to that, I was deeply enmeshed in a state of, let's call it, immature psychological adolescence, really with little regard for others around me, for myself, my own health. I was deeply sick and unwell for a large portion of time, and ultimately I was seeking healing. It was clear that my previous socio-cultural reference points, including those of the Western pharmaceutical medical model and system, well, they had failed me immensely. And after what I can only call a handful of moments of divine intervention, the message came through that I needed to find my way to the jungle, and I'd downright get there or die trying. That was really the seriousness of this sense of life and death urgency, to be drawn towards the master teacher plants over in the Amazon. And really what I spoke to just then, that's not all that uncommon, this feeling of being drawn towards death and not quite realizing that it's some form of psychological death that's required, rather than the physical death that many choose to succumb to. And I certainly have known people that have chosen that route, not knowing that there was an alternative, or not wanting to pursue the alternative due to extreme pain, intense overwhelm, a lack of resources and support. Yeah, things like this. So I chose for myself the intensity of entheogenic sacramental medicines. And it's strange to say, but I felt like within myself there was some kind of deep knowing that this was the path that was going to help unravel me and help reveal a lot of things and heal a lot of things in my life. So that's that. Now, I'm currently reading Christopher Basche's book, LSD and the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven, where he's essentially documenting his 20-year journey where he undertook 73 high-dose LSD sessions to not only excavate his own psyche in the pursuit of personal healing, but to explore the mind of the universe, to map consciousness, and to try and illuminate this unified field of consciousness that underlies and oversees all of physical existence. So far, it's been a fascinating book. I'm over halfway, and really it delves into many mystical, transcendental, spiritual philosophies that have been revealed to myself during my own journeys along this path. And one of the quotes that I'm about to read, that speaks to choosing, or you could also say being chosen, by this intense path of personal transformation. So this is what he writes in one section of his book. If we choose a form of transformational practice in which our conditioning is released slowly, the result is a series of smaller initiations spread over a longer period of time, perhaps even many lifetimes. By contrast, working with a psychedelic like LSD is an example of a transformational practice that triggers an accelerated purification process that gives us quicker access to these realities, but there is a price to be paid for this quicker access. The price is the intensification of the death-rebirth process. That's what he has to say. So all of that, that's obvious if you've been down the path, and it also became apparent when I first started down the path with Don Howard all those years ago. Yeah, it all really started with the first time that I drank ayahuasca, and I will, I'll never forget that. It's etched into my bones, and many of the spirit beings and those initial awakenings are still with me, and I still call on some of those guides for guidance in this day and age. And part of why I'm doing this podcast is sharing this story of my first foray into the world of plant medicine, particularly with ayahuasca. It's not something that I think I've spoken to before on here. So if I'm to go all the way back, I can remember my heart. My heart was beating out of my chest when I went up to the altar to drink and gulped ayahuasca down and smoked a mapacho to conceal the flavor. I certainly remember a rich, earthy, like a battery acid taste on my palate. I went back to my seat and I repeated my mantra at the time, which was breathe, relax, observe, let go. Breathe, relax, observe, let go. And over some short moments in the darkness, colors began to swirl. After these colors began to swirl for just what felt like a very ephemeral moment of time, I was catapulted straight in. And there was an unimaginable assortment of infinite geometric kaleidoscopic patterns, like gemstones, scintillating, morphing, very slowly, very gently. Had quite a royal, regal, Egyptian color palette to it. I recall thousands of eyes gazing down upon me, encasing me in a dome-like setting. There was the silhouette of these 3D geometrical, polygonal shaped giant snakes surrounding me. And I felt another presence creep in on my periphery. And then all of a sudden, those geometric shapes and patterns, they shifted instantaneously. And it was just all of a sudden that they appeared. Indigenous, tribal, humanoid-like spirit figures, real as real. Some standing, some wandering about. There was an older masculine presence seated right beside me to my right-hand side. As you might suspect, I was completely dumbfounded. This is going back a long time now, like 10 years ago. So completely dumbfounded, completely in awe. I knew from all my prior research that the shaman called this realm of existence the spirit world. And in that moment, I certainly understood why. There was a sentience, a real intelligence, and a wisdom emanating from this space and from these beings. And I asked a question, or several series of questions that were all very similar to each other, and it was revealed telepathically that all these beings that I was experiencing around me, they are my ancestor spirits, watching over me, protecting me, guiding me. So that was quite revelatory and awe-inspiring. Doesn't encapsulate really how my mind was being blown at this point in time. The Icaros, the medicine songs from our curanderos, Don Robert, Doña Eliana, Don Carlos, our medicine people, they came and they went out of the space. The jungle soundscape really permeated the entire Maloka, the giant ceremonial hut that we were sitting in. I could feel, sense, and see the energetic grid of the temple that we were sitting in. It was electric. I vomited. I cried, tears of sorrow. I was shown unconditional love. At one stage, I felt like I was a tiny little bee rolling back and forth, nurtured by this ocean of delicate flower petals. There was an archaic shaman figure who presented seeds to me in his palm. I was pierced through the throat with a large blade. There were playful, dancing entities trying to coax laughter out of me, kind of coming in and out and hiding behind these large spirit trees in these visions that I was having. Yeah, and throughout all of this, the central theme behind everything was love. So love for friends, love for family, love for myself. yeah, that first time, it was epic, intense, electric, profound, and really, despite the visionary adventure that I was having and that I was presented with, I was having a lot of memories that highlighted the unhealthy and harmful aspects of myself and the way that I had poorly treated myself and other people. And the message was coming through that as long as I acknowledged and owned my shadow side and the darkness within and continued the work of understanding these aspects of myself, then I would have more of an opportunity to choose to move towards and embody the healthier, heart-centered, soul-oriented qualities of myself. And eventually a candle was lit to signify the close of ceremony. The intensity had tapered off, and before I knew it, I was a human again, sitting there kind of rubbing my body and my legs and my arms, just feeling this humanness, this sense of being alive. Quite extraordinary. A couple of days passed. There was a second and a third ayahuasca ceremony, but the fourth one, this was, and perhaps still is, I would say, definitely still is, one of the most rattling experiences that I have ever had. And this kind of ties into, I'm telling these stories because it ties into what Christopher Basche was saying about choosing a path of intense psychospiritual peak transformational experiences. So the fourth ceremony, no longer than really 5 minutes had passed since drinking, and my body already wanted to expel the liquid. That's not all that uncommon, but I fought the urge. I held it down, making sure I'd retain the necessary amount to journey, to connect, focused on that mantra, breathe, relax, observe, let go. The candle was blown out. The room was cast into darkness, and the Icaros hadn't even started yet before I needed to vomit. And as quick as this urge came on, I was transported to a place that I really couldn't have ever imagined existed. It was a place of intense, archaic, pure poison. There were no visitations from interdimensional beings, no traveling through beautiful, otherworldly paradigms. This place that I was in really was somewhat reminiscent of the classic Shipibo geometric patterned artwork. However, the flavoring, the texture of this was very stark, contrasting colors against a white backdrop. Reds, purples, yellows, blues, oranges, greens, and all of these colors and patterns were flashing violently like a warning sign, or more appropriately, like danger lights going off. It was as if there was, imagine some kind of hazardous material has been leaked inside a nuclear power plant, and the alarms and the computers and the entire electrical grid is just going absolutely haywire. That's what it was like. So in amongst all of these flashing, in and out would come these countless symbols of the snake and the dagger symbols. How interesting. The same symbolism often used in the world of medicine. And this symbol of the snake and the dagger, well, it's known as the rod of Asclepius. And what was being conveyed to me in those moments, that there was a serious poison inside of me that needed to be expelled. And this experience that I was having and was about to keep having was akin to the Amazonian supernatural psychic version of a severe, life-threatening medical operating procedure. It was relentless, horrendous. It was everything combined to make up this place of pure, hellish, deathly poison. It was the visuals, the nausea in my entire physiological, psychological, and energetic essence. So yeah, it was the time. The time had come for me to rid myself of the toxicity and the poison that I'd carried around with me for the majority of my adult life. So this experience, it was so intense that I was teetering on the edge of calling out to one of our shamans to try and bring it down a notch. The Icaros, it felt like they were being sung so fast. It felt like they were being sung just for me. Like the curanderos knew that I was severely poisoned and it had to come out. And in the midst of all of this, and as intense as it was, I knew that it had to be expelled. So I decided against help and chose to write it out and surrender. This idea of surrender. I mean, I was a complete neophyte at this point in time, and surrender was too far beyond the reach. Even that phrasing, it sounds funny, but it was too far beyond or away from my ego. My ego couldn't even, my sense of self couldn't grasp grasp this idea of surrender. Yeah, funny phrasing, because we're not actually grasping surrender, we're letting go into surrender. But surrender was out of the picture at this point in time. I couldn't let go. I felt like I was hanging on for dear life. The white knuckle sleigh ride, as Don Howard would say. And then when any unhealthy thoughts or feelings or memories came up, this intense flashing danger patterns, they would fade, and these toxic feelings and thoughts, they would manifest into this black and brown, decaying, decomposing visions, and I was violently forced to throw them up. So yeah, I was physically purging stuff from my physiology, but also this mental and emotional and energetic densities and traumas from deep down to the depths of my body, like gut-wrenchingly, explosively cruel. Like I could feel my intestines and my stomach squeezing themselves, like wringing themselves out, trying to get every last little bit of malevolence within out. And I remember these times where there were these spiders and strange insects crawling erratically over my skin. And funnily enough, that didn't really bother me too much. And perhaps, even more bizarre was that I felt like this space was very, very familiar, like I'd been there before. Yeah, very, very strange. There was a low-pitched kind of droning sound in my ears that kind of faded in and out. And I continued to fade in and out of what felt like this place in between life and death, like the landscape of dying, but not quite there yet. And even when the intensity came down, a notch, several notches, I still felt like I was just at the complete mercy of this plant medicine, ayahuasca. Eventually, the candle came on. I continued to journey through this slow tapering off for quite some time. But really, it was a truly harrowing, terrifying experience. And it might seem like I'm being over-dramatic, and if it does seem over-dramatic, even now, telling the story, well, I can guarantee it was 100 times more intense when it was happening and shortly thereafter. And honestly, I was glad to be alive afterwards. And, it's interesting, during the third ceremony back then, I remember Don Howard said something to the effect of, picture yourself as an empty vessel, waiting and ready to be filled. And it became clear during this fourth round that I was indeed not an empty vessel at all when I was puking my guts up for those several hours on end. And it made complete sense. How could I be filled up when I was already full of a lifetime of poor habits and conditioning and programming, dysfunctional, harmful behaviors that I was not only perpetuating within myself, but projecting onto other people? And, clarity, meaning, purpose, these are some of the things that we at times ask within our life. And yeah, the clarity that I got was very different to what I wanted and let alone expected. And I knew that I couldn't keep living as a toxic, poisonous vessel. So the experience certainly taught me some valuable lessons and provided some much needed insight, and essentially just scared me straight. And the following morning I was still rattled, completely scattered, but strangely enough, that all changed that next morning when we had a flower bath, and my work with Wachuma started afterwards. And those are tales for another time, but Wachuma continued to straighten me out and fill my vessel in a really good way, a sincere way, a loving and a humble way. Yeah, those initial stages, those initial experiences and journeys with ayahuasca certainly ring true with what Christopher Basche had to say. There is a price to be paid for the quicker access to transformation, and that price is the intensification of the death and the rebirth process. So, hey, buyer beware. Buyer beware. Now, some of these experiences are still with me in a strong way, but of course not as strong, not as vivid as when they first occurred, and that might be obvious. And I want to speak to this. It's something that I touched upon in a recent social media video, this idea of the fading. And really the fading is, you could call it a natural process that happens after peak experiences. It could be with something like ayahuasca or other sacred medicine journeys, psychedelic exploration, vision quest, other initiatory rites or profound experiences that we feel deeply changes us in some way. The afterglow that we often simmer in directly after an experience, well, it's not going to linger in its fullest capacity, as much as we might love that feeling and want that feeling to stay in that body, and we want to stay in that place of that feeling. But truth be told, the brain's neurochemistry, the chemical makeup in the body, these things change, they regulate, and we come back to some sort of baseline after our consumption of exogenous constituents from substances, from plants, from certain animals, or, not just exogenous, but also after the endogenous release of chemicals via breath work or other kind of experiences, spontaneous vision, trance states, through dancing, fasting, all kinds of stuff. So it's natural to want the afterglow to linger and for the fresh insights and the wisdom and the feelings to be a forever present emanation. But life continues to stir us. We have new experiences. We encounter difficulties. We continue to change. And when those experiences that we initially had that were once fresh and profound, in one way or another, when they begin to fade, it's a good thing to know that this is part of the process. Knowing that this is part of the process can help release our expectations and attachments to how you think things ought to be in regards to our relationship with that experience. In saying that, I want to share some insights into how to better remember your entheogenic, sacramental medicines, psychedelic, peak transformative experiences, with how to remember them, better remember them with more lucidity, more clarity, more connection. And one of the ways that I want to speak about to cultivate a better memory of these experiences is rather quite simply to make a commitment to show up to the altar of creative expression after we've had these types of experiences, really with a sense of immediacy after these experiences, to try and capture some essence or the narrative arc of our journey. And look, that creative expression is going to look different for all of us. For some, it's going to be journaling down our experiences. And I don't mean sitting in a computer or a phone and typing out the experiences. I mean putting actual pen to paper in a diary. The research is out there that there is a different kind of remembering, of learning, of sense-making, of experience in the body, psychosomatic anchoring that happens when we physically write something down with pen and paper rather than type it out. So this has been a big one for me in the past for trying to better remember the narrative sequential arc of my experiences with greater lucidity, with greater articulation. So there's journaling. If you are musically inclined, or you could say even if you're not, acquire an instrument, whether a rattle, a drum, a kalimba, a sound bowl, whatever it is. Acquire an instrument, get out the instrument, and allow the experience that you've just had speak through you and that instrument. Now, guitar is a big one for me, songwriting. So this is one way that I help to anchor in my experiences and retain that deep connection to the profound and the sacred, those journeys that I've had. And for some of you, maybe it's actually not with instruments, but maybe it's a poem, trying to retain some kind of essence of the experience through poetry. And really, some might say that that's poetry in a nutshell, capturing some glimmer, some essence of the divine, of the mystery. Then maybe for some of you, this idea of creative artistry, creative expression, it's going to be sitting down at the canvas, the easel with the paintbrush or pencils, or some form of creative artistry involving visual design, drawing, painting, geometry, these sorts of things. Then, could even be dancing the experience into the sensory and somatic landscape of your body memory. But really what I'm getting at is just showing up to the altar of creative expression. And the more that we do this, and particularly so if you are inclined to journal, I've found that it can assist with better recall, better memory, and really I would liken it to being akin to having and keeping a dream journal. When you journal down your dreams immediately after waking up, and I'm speaking about this from years of experience, when you journal them more regularly, your recall of your dreams become infinitely better. And if you wait too long after waking up and try to capture them, well, there's certainly the likelihood that they have already started to greatly dissipate, or if not entirely have disappeared. So yeah, it's great to create the appropriate space afterwards to capture the journey through creative artistry, creative expression practices, and to have that sense of immediacy about it. Now, on that topic of recall and remembering, it's also perfectly okay to not have some clarity on some kind of linear, analytical, rational narrative arc of our experience. And also, it's okay if we do. I think that there can be an importance in both. And I often talk about marinating or simmering in the symbology, the imagery, the metaphor, the mythic, to let it work through us over time. So not necessarily being in a rush to assign some form of designated meaning or to grasp a sense of knowing what the experience was all about, a sense of control, of rational understanding, these kinds of things. Rather just letting the mystery seep into us continuously, slowly, over time. I've had experiences, symbology, imagery from the plants, from Vision Quest, from nature, from spirit, that still stir me to this day. And it doesn't quite feel right to try and create and control the meaning of these things, just to try and satiate the rational, analytical, logical mind. I'm quite happy just allowing them to simmer through me. And if meaning does come to them over time, then also great, but I'm certainly not in a hurry or not actively pursuing that. In saying that, on the flip side, I've also found myself exploring the linear kind of narrative arc of experiences, of journeys, of actually rationalizing and analyzing, bringing logic to the table. Because when we're talking about the plant medicine world in particular, it's certainly not uncommon to have confusing messages, paradoxical messages, strange ideas about what we should or should not do, or who we are or who we are not. It's certainly not uncommon for people to externalize their power and their agency. For example, the plant told me to do this, or the plant told me to do that. I'm often skeptical because it could be said that there are a lot of people that haven't yet found a sense of understanding, a solid baseline or foundation when it comes to the convergence and the differences between many aspects of self. Let's say the personal mind, the ego, the collective mind, archetypes, egregores, thought forms, higher intelligences, the soul. So yeah, there's a lot to dissect there, and discernment is needed, alongside an integration of the rational, the analytical, the logical, the narrative arc, the sequential arc, alongside that imagery, the symbology, the mythic, the imaginal, and of course making that commitment to show up to the altar of creative expression to help us better remember and anchor in these types of experiences, rather than merely having some ephemeral, highly charged peak experience that came and went in a flash. No matter how profound that might have felt in the moment and how we feel that is going to change us and may change us, we still need to cultivate good soil for these experiences to take root and continue to move us, stir us, change us in good ways over time. Otherwise, we might feel like the change has been significant or is going to be significant, but without the appropriate integration, we haven't really progressed in our soul's evolution or psychospiritual maturation. And to think otherwise, just because we're involved in some form of sacred ceremony, well, without that integration, surely we've got to be kidding ourselves. So the creative act that we're speaking about, the creative artistry, creative expression, I can guarantee that there's going to be some of you listening who are telling some kind of story where you're saying that you're not a creative or you're not an artist. And I'm here to tell you that you're wrong. Sorry, not sorry. It's a BS story that you're telling yourself. And I talk about this in my latest newsletter that just went out, where I was riffing on the allurement of the mountains and this bioresonance of our mind-body-soul complex toward certain environments. So it's evident at this stage of my life, this is a little bit of a tangent here, but we're going to get there. It's evident that I'm a mountain man, and I speak about this timelessness of the allure of the mountains, which speaks in different ways to all of us and is certainly a multifaceted thing. There's the scenic views, there's the unique geological features, the clean air, the diversity of the flora and the fauna. There's the escape from urban living, the personal challenges and a sense of pilgrimage going up to the mountains, sacred sites, a sense of adventure, peace and solitude, spiritual significance, and intimacy with nature, exploring the mystery, all these types of things. And I pose this question in the newsletter: what are you drawn to? Where are you drawn to? Oceans, deserts, forests, urban or suburban landscapes. Whatever the case, there is certainly some kind of bioresonance between ourselves and certain places in the external world. And I make a link between that bioresonance towards these certain places within the natural world and our creative expression and our creative exploration. When our internal state of being and external environment when it seems like there's a match there, it feels like there's a match, it feels like there's a harmony there, there can be a greater potential for inspiration to flow more freely, for inspiration to be received, for inspiration to be harnessed. And I say that this is of great importance when we are contemplating and enacting this idea that I dare say you're interested in if you're listening or watching this. It's this idea of creating the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible, as Charles Eisenstein so eloquently put it. The inspiration that nourishes us, the inspiration that we draw from. This is an important thing for artists, for creatives, which we all are. And if you don't think you're not an artist, that's a story that you tell yourself, you're misinformed, as I say. You are greatly limiting yourself. We all have the capacity to be great artists. And if you haven't yet read Rick Rubin's best-selling book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being, highly recommend it. There is an abundance of gems in there, one of which is the following. We tend to think of the artist's work as the output. The real work of the artist is a way of being in the world. The real work of the artist is a way of being in the world. So our daily life, it's the place to consume, to receive information, to harness that, to channel it. And really our lives, your life is the canvas upon which you can paint your brushstrokes of creative artistry, of creative expression. So we've been going for a little while now. I'm going to wrap this one up shortly. But before I do, if you have been a long time listener of the podcast, or even if you haven't, firstly, thank you. I appreciate you tuning in and offering up some of your space, time and attention. And secondly, you might recall that earlier on towards the start of the year, I mentioned this framework of mine, which is consume, create, imaginate. Well, I still have that written on my whiteboard in my office, and I orient myself often towards some sense of harmony within that framework. AINI, you could say, sacred reciprocity, giving and receiving in equal measure. So just as I consume and take things in, information in all of its forms, ensure that I'm creating in equal measure. So consume, create, but then also imaginate in equal measure too. It's in one of my previous podcasts. I can't remember which one, but you could certainly search it if you go back a little bit. But really what I'm getting at is that I've been on supercharge mode since the start of this year. Big dreamings, big imaginings, a lot of healthy consumption, but also some really big kind of creative outputs and expansions too. One of the most notable things has been the pilgrimage shamanic wilderness expeditions, amongst other things. But the pilgrimage has really become a powerful offering and has cemented in a new standard for the kind of high caliber transformational gatherings that I want to continue to offer within the larger space of the shamanic healing arts for healing and for higher states of consciousness. And then there's the mysticism, initiatory rites, health and wellness and vitality, wilderness immersion, mountain trekking, sacred song, so much more. And Rick Rubin says something beautifully in The Creative Act, and I'm going to share this quote right now. He says, "Ride the wave as long as it can be ridden. If you are fortunate enough to experience the strike of inspiration, take full advantage of the access. Remain in the energy of this rarefied moment for as long as it lasts. When flowing, keep going. If you're a writer and you tap into a stream of ideas before bed, you may want to stay with it until dawn. If you're a musician and you've reached your goal of creating 1 song or 10 songs, yet the music is still coming, capture all you can. The work yielded may not be used in the current project, but it may be of use another time. Or it may not. The task of the artist is simply to recognize the transmission and stay with it in gratitude until it truly runs its course." Beautiful. There's so much that Rick Rubin has to say about the creative process and about the creative artistry. So if you haven't read the book, I definitely suggest it. I'm riding the waves. I've gone into the shallows for a little while as we nestle into winter. It was clear that my body was speaking to me, that I needed some rest. I needed to slow down. There were some other creative projects that wanted to be birthed, so things have been nice and gentle, just allowing myself to recuperate before I start making that paddle out towards some bigger sets. And with my own personal vision quest, which is coming up in a month now, in the Red Center just outside of Allen Springs, I'm going to be calling in a vision for this next phase of my life and my work, and also acknowledging the path it's been so far, all that's been birthed so far, while also preparing for our own vision quest that we'll be holding in October alongside the next pilgrimage. So if you vibe what's happening within this space, you can get in contact with me on social media or via my website, kayutakiora.com. You can check out the upcoming events page on the website for dates. It's October 3rd to the 6th for the pilgrimage, and then October 26th to November 2nd for our 4-day, 4-night vision quest. And both of these are going to be held over in the Grampians. And look, it's the catchphrase, it's the tagline that I touch upon. Exploring the mystery, reclaiming more of our power, activating more of our potential, awakening more of our soul gifts and medicines. It's connecting more deeply with the wisdom of the mountains, with nature, with spirit, with our entire mind, body, soul, spirit, heart complex, and our unique and meaningful and purposeful place within our larger ecological landscape of community and nature. The wild cocoon of nature, the wilderness, it's always there with a message for heart and soul. The messages on the wind, the message from birdsong, the geometric patterns in an ice crystal, the flow of river water, the eagle soaring overhead. Nature is a mirror. When we take pause, when we open ourselves to the spirit of nature, the spirit of the wild, synchronicities can become more apparent. This happens in my life time and time again. Our sensory antenna can become more finely tuned. We can enhance our pattern recognition with all of the significant ways that soul, with spirit, that nature, that life has been trying to communicate with us. Our nervous system can co-regulate with nature. We can reharmonize ourselves with soul and spirit. The challenges that we've parked to the side can find voice, either beginning or continuing or completing a healing cycle. This is all good work. And just because it's good work doesn't mean it's easy work. It's certainly not for everyone. And there are some words from the 1650s, going back some time ago now, shared by Eugenius Philalethes, which was a pseudonym used by Thomas Vaughan. And Thomas Vaughan was a Welsh philosopher, alchemist, a mystic. And I've shared these words before, and I'm going to end with them now. To this mountain you shall go in a certain night, when it comes, most long and most dark, and see that you prepare yourselves by prayer. Insist upon the way that leads to the mountain, but ask not of any man where the way lies. Only follow your guide, who shall offer himself to you and will meet you on the way. This guide will bring you to the mountain at midnight, when all things are silent and dark. It is necessary that you arm yourselves with resolute, heroic courage, lest you fear those things that will happen, and so fall back. And so, as guide, I offer myself to you. I'll meet you on the way, bringing those to the mountains who dare heed the call. I'm going to leave it at that. I hope this episode has been as fruitful as birdsong on morning wind. Share it with a friend, leave a review, screenshot and post to social media. Connect with me on there at kayutakiora on Instagram, TikTok. The website is kayutakiora.com. Even better yet, come to a gathering, join the community. Let's go. Until next time.